Take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Who gon' take it there? Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So the media world is changing, my friends. The press is changing, and the relationship between the press and the government is changing. And that has been true ever since Trump first came to power, really without him as well. There's lots of interesting questions about how whistleblowers are treated, how independently the press operates from what government wants them to say in the first place. All of these things are questionable at best. And what Trump does is he's an interesting wedge, because for the most part, the press does go along with what the broader government apparatus wants them to say, especially on issues like war. If certain things about what America's doing overseas or what America's funding overseas, if the government doesn't want certain stories to be out there, the media more than likely is going to acquiesce to it. And even in recent history, there have been whistleblowers and people who brought things to the press's attention as leaks from the government that the press decided not to move forward with because the government wouldn't want them to do so. Which is kind of like the opposite of what the press is supposed to be doing. But what Trump does is he creates a weird aberration in that pattern where not only does Trump want to exercise ultimate authority on behalf of the government, and he wants to make demands and have the press and others acquiesce instantly. That's Trump's idea of power. But he also has created so much friction with the sort of normal state of affairs in terms of the government dictating what the press can and can't say, that it creates these weird sort of feedback distortion patterns where things that Trump say kind of contradict things that the larger government apparatus says or has agreed on. And the perfect example of this is the whole Gulf of Mexico fiasco. So Trump famously at this point removed the AP from the White House press pool because they would not acquiesce to his demands that they now start calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. So this is obviously him trying to exert pressure and exert leverage to see how much he can get away with and see how much he can pressure these news outlets into doing what he wants them to do. And so that has kind of dictated, for lack of a better word, the entire pattern that we are now seeing that allows for something that happened yesterday on the 22nd, which was Tim Pool, right-wing podcaster and all-around goober, uneducated moron, terrible communicator with a very large audience. He was in the White House press pool asking questions. So they have created a new seat, a new media seat for Tim Pool and people like him to come and be a part of the press pool, essentially to have access to the White House and to become a part of the propaganda system that disseminates information from the White House. And they already have a pretty efficient propaganda system with the likes of Tim Pool already acting, in perfect lockstep as a delivery system for that propaganda. However, they seem to want to make it a direct relationship, and they want to whittle away at the norm, so to speak, that extreme right-wing outlets like Tim Pool's outlet or Newsmax or whatever are not going to get the same type of representation and access as places like the AP, places like NBC and ABC that are, highly accredited. So essentially it's whittling away at the idea of being a credited news source or a credible news source at all. And so that's how Tim Pool ends up in this position. So I want to play this clip really quick, talk a little bit about some of the things that he said, and break down the broader situation. It's a short clip. I apologize to all of you. I hate watching Tim Pool. He fucking sucks. But it is kind of important that people like him are being included in this press pool. So let's watch it real quick.
Many of the news organizations that are represented in this room have marched in lockstep on false narratives, such as the Very Fine People hoax, the Covington smear, and now what's being called the Maryland Man hoax, where an MS-13 gang member adjudicated by 2 different judges, I believe, is just simply being referred to as a Maryland Man over and over again. Now, in an effort from the White House to expand access to new companies, you've created this new media seat. So I'm wondering if you can comment on, following this expansion, you've had numerous outlets disparage the companies that you've had sit here, as well as the reporters. I'm wondering if you can comment on that unprofessional behavior, as well as elaborate if there's any plans to expand access to new companies.
Sure. Well, we certainly welcome diverse viewpoints.
So there you have it. Tim Pool asking the first question at a White House press briefing. Man, that guy sucks, huh? He just so fucking smarmy, dude. He's one of the least tolerable of any of these right-wing guys. I think I've said that about him before. He's just so icky, man. And like, what a teacher's pet. You know what I mean? This fucking loser. A lot of these networks have moved in lockstep. And so he's using this as an opportunity to paint exactly that narrative. Not just, again, accusing Kilmar Garcia of being MS-13, which there's no actual evidence of, and his things about a court adjudicating it is nonsense. But what he's trying to do is he's trying to create this narrative of, the mainstream media or whatever moving in lockstep, spreading misinformation, and that's why outlets like him are finding themselves there, because they are the truth tellers. They are the ones who are prioritizing real information, whatever. So obviously that's laughable. Anybody who's even working in those right-wing media spaces and outlets would probably laugh at that idea, that the information they are putting out is more credible than the information that's coming from the mainstream press. I mean, certainly at Fox News, I know for a fact that they do not think of themselves as the more accurate version of mainstream news. So that's not what this is about. What it's about is people who are more friendly to the president being able to essentially buy access to the White House by doing what he wants, doing and saying what he wants. And I think it's interesting, this whole thing about how they have moved in lockstep on these narratives, when the only reason that he finds himself there is because he's willing to say what Trump tells him to say. If it comes up, to mention the Gulf of Mexico, he's going to call it the Gulf of America. So that's him moving in lockstep with the White House, which is way worse. Even if all of these other agencies were moving in lockstep, they're deciding and colluding on what narratives to run with. To some extent that happens. For the most part, with real reporting is just real reporting. So if the information checks out, then multiple outlets are going to report on it. But even them colluding against the White House is much better. That's much closer to what you want the press to be doing than what he's doing, which is colluding with the White House to create narratives. And so this idea that what they're doing has any nobility to it, or that this is any version of a truth teller, he's not, because all they want is to be in a position to cozy up to power. And they're 100% willing to sacrifice the truth to do it. And really, Tim Pool's entire trajectory has been an example of this. He started at Occupy Wall Street, and he was reporting on the people on the ground there, what their demands were, that sort of thing. I think he was doing some drone footage back in the day. So he was kind of on the ground pretty early to that, and he gained some notoriety by reporting on Occupy Wall Street. But the documentarian that he was working with back then kind of decided that he didn't want to work with him because he felt that Tim Pool was more pursuing attention and virality, whatever version of virality existed back at that time, more so than trying to get to the bottom of anything or trying to do serious reporting. So they were on to some really good work, and it was a very good start for Tim Pool's career, but ultimately he was always more focused on clout. And so that was, the earliest stages of his media career. He ended up building his podcast platform through questionable means, if you ask me. I mean, I don't really know where he came from. I remember when he started getting popular, and I don't view the growth of his audience as organic, me personally. I think it's way outsized. I think he's a perfect example of somebody who has an operation that's way bigger than the value of his product justifies. There's no doubt that he has a large audience. He has a lot of people that tune into him, and he has been able to monetize that audience better than a lot of people. But even if you just look at like scandals that happened, like Tenet Media, and how he basically got caught by accepting money from them. Now, there's question as to whether he knew that that's where the money was coming from. And in the indictment that came from the Department of Justice, they did not accuse him of knowing where the money was coming from. And it was coming from some guy at Tenet Media, which was the firm that was disseminating money to people like Dave Rubin, people like Tim Pool and The Blaze and others. And so really what Tim Pool is guilty of is not looking into really who this donor was, who this financier was. And it turns out the money was coming from Russia. And the reason they were propping up people like Dave Rubin and people like Tim Pool is because that matches the narrative that they want to push. They want to push anti-mainstream media and essentially a copycat clone of the media that is going to parrot Russian talking points and anything that Donald Trump wants to parrot. So that's where the lockstep is happening. Understand that. The other place that Tim Pool popped up prominently in the last few years was he was actually mentioned in the January 6th proceedings as they were going over media figures who helped spread this big lie that Donald Trump actually won in 2020. And I doubt Tim Pool has ever taken a firm stance on that. I don't think he's one of the people to this day who still says that Donald Trump won. But I think what he does do, because he does this on every single issue, is he says like, well, I don't really know. There's people saying this, and then there's people saying that. There's a great video about him, a long form video that I'll put up about how he essentially talks out of both sides of his mouth. And what did he call it? He called it the megaphone and the whisper or something like that. So basically he parrots some talking point that's coming from some place in the media. And he says, Donald Trump says 50 million votes were dumped in the ocean. And if those votes had been counted, he would have won. But the people who dumped them in the ocean were FBI secret cabal agents from Iran. And that's the only reason that Donald Trump lost. And that's what they're saying. Now, look, I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not. I don't know. Doesn't sound that true, but could be. That's essentially Tim Pool's strategy. So he repeats word for word the propaganda, and then he kind of talks out of the other side of his mouth and goes, well, I mean, I don't know. Who knows? I'm just a guy. So that's the technique. And what it does is it blasts out the right-wing propaganda to his audience while allowing him to not take any accountability whatsoever. And he has fully survived off of this strategy his entire career. I remember in 2020, he was predicting that Donald Trump was going to win by a landslide. He was saying over and over and over again, Donald Trump's going to win 50 states. Donald Trump's going to win 51 states. He's going to win 52 states. There's going to be new states, and Donald Trump's going to win them. That's what he was saying leading up to the 2020 election. And then when it actually happened, he never had to take accountability for the fact that not only was he wrong, but he also helped pave the way for this giant election lie that Donald Trump needed the help of media figures like Tim Pool to spread. So that is how Tim Pool ended up in the January 6th proceedings, once again, moving in lockstep with MAGA. And the people who like Tim Pool like him because they view him as somewhat objective. They view him as somebody who's not a right-winger and who's supposedly a liberal. He supposedly has some, like, whatever, socialist beliefs. He kind of tepidly plays with that from time to time. But ultimately, anybody who's not in that right-wing bubble recognizes that all Tim Pool does is spread right-wing media narratives. And so what's helpful for them to do now that they are in a more mainstream media position and they are being legitimized by the White House is it is helpful for them to castigate the rest of the media in the way that they have been rightfully castigated for their patterns of spreading propaganda. And this is what Donald Trump has done ever since he first came on the scene. It's kind of like that thing of accusing them of whatever you're doing, but it's a way to discredit your enemies. And it also makes it so that once they reaffirm their critique of you, the same criticism that you're moving in lockstep with propaganda narratives that aren't based in truth, you're just reporting on other things that right-wing outlets have said without substantiating anything, so you're not actually repeating any real information. Him saying this thing about Kilmar Garcia being an MS-13 member and not a Maryland man is a perfect example of that. He is quite literally a Maryland man. So he's saying that this is some media conspiracy, that they're all calling him Maryland man as opposed to whatever, MS-13 thug criminal. But there's no proof that he's an MS-13 gang member. No proof of that has been provided at all. And this stuff he's talking about, court proceedings or whatever, these are proceedings that happen, but they have nothing to do with proving him guilty of anything. And guess what? If you want to use stuff like that, information, situational, circumstantial evidence in order to lock somebody up or justify arresting them, whatever, guess what? You have to do that before you deport them. You have to do that before you sentence them. So regardless of even if these people are able to prove that he's an MS-13 gang member, which they can't and they never will, because if they could, they would have done it by now. But it's not about that. It's about the fact that they're going to use anything they can to deport somebody. And then once he's deported, they're saying we can't bring him back. That's what this is about. And Tim Pool is moving in lockstep with that narrative because that's what he knows his job is. And he knows that if he does that, he knows that if he tosses them that softball and allows them to answer the question in a way that continues to paint their narrative, that they're going to have him back and they're going to continue to view him as legitimate news. And that's also, part of the reason he's there in the first place is because he supposedly stood up to Trump against the January 6th committee. He was viewed as pro-Trump because of his position in that. And I think he is pro-Trump. He's always been pro-Trump, even though he tries to pretend that he's not. So that's all I really have to say about this. There's going to be more fucking clowns like this that are asking teachers' pet bootlicker questions like this. I mean, this is the kind of guy who tries to say that he is a libertarian. You know what I mean? Like, these people are supposed to be critical of power. And all they want to do is aid and abet the Trump administration in achieving unlimited power. And it's just funny, man, because that power does not extend to any of them. It might temporarily. And especially the more and more favor they curry with the administration, that's going to benefit them. But ultimately, that power belongs to one person and one person alone. And the more power you hand him, the more he's going to use that power against you as soon as he has the opportunity to do it. And that's exactly what happened with Elon Musk and Trump as well. But I think I'm going to get to that in the next episode. So I'll sign off on that one. We'll keep our eye on the press pool because they're going to get rid of more legitimate news sources like the AP and keep bringing in clowns like Tim Pool. So it's just going to become more and more of a clown show. But at the very least, it should be somewhat entertaining. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. It's the best way to support this channel. I'm posting all kinds of exclusive content there, like podcasts that don't make it to the main page, podcasts about more general things, book reviews, movie reviews, different stuff like that. I'm also dropping music early on there. I got an EP coming out called Dead Internet Theory. That's going to be out in the next week or so. You can hear that early as a member. Also, all the beats, if you like the beats in this podcast, all of that are posted there and more. If there's other stuff you'd like to hear as exclusive content, let me know and we'll work some things out.